The fuel gauge reads 1/4. The men around you haven't slept in 31 hours. You're holding a line that shouldn't exist, with units that shouldn't still be fighting, on ground that was never supposed to be the last ground. And at 0330 hours, July 1st, 1942, the dust on the western horizon starts moving. That dust is Rommel's Afrika Korps. Behind you, 100 kilometers, just over 60 miles, is Alexandria. Behind Alexandria is the Suez Canal. Behind the Suez Canal is the entire Allied position in the Middle East. If this line breaks tonight, all of it goes. So let me ask you something. How do you ask men who've been retreating for 6 weeks, men who've watched fortresses fall in a single afternoon, every defensive line collapse within days, how do you ask those men to be the ones who don't run? And why would they listen? That's the question at the center of First Alamein. Not the famous battle, not Montgomery's set-piece victory in October with the barrage and the bagpipes. That one gets the films. This is the other Alamein, the desperate one, the one nobody planned for, nobody expected to win, and almost nobody remembers. The one that actually saved Egypt. 6 weeks earlier, Tobruk had fallen, not slowly, in a single day. 33,000 men captured. Enough supplies in those dumps to keep Rommel moving for weeks without his own convoys. Churchill heard the news sitting with Roosevelt in Washington. He called it one of the most painful moments of the war, not just for the strategic loss, but because Tobruk was supposed to prove the British could hold something. It proved the opposite. What followed was collapse. Units lost contact. Supply dumps burned. Whole brigades moved east, not because they had orders, but because everyone else was moving east and nobody wanted to be last. 640 kilometers of retreat in 6 weeks, nearly 400 miles. Rommel didn't stop. Promoted to Field Marshal the day Tobruk fell, the youngest in German history, he barely slowed down to read the telegram, because in front of him there was almost nothing. Almost. By late June, Rommel was running on fumes, literally. His supply line stretched 800 kilometers back to Tripoli, nearly 500 miles. He had 55 operational panzers. His infantry hadn't slept properly in a week. His Italian formations were at 40% strength in some divisions. He attacked anyway, because momentum was the only resource he had left that didn't need a supply convoy. His intelligence told him the 8th Army was shattered, that one more push would turn retreat into rout. The intelligence wasn't wrong about the state of the army. It was wrong about what the army would do. What stopped Rommel wasn't a plan. It wasn't a masterstroke from Cairo. It was geography. At El Alamein, for the first time in the entire North African campaign, he couldn't go around. The Mediterranean locked the north. The Qattara Depression, a salt marsh dropping 134 meters below sea level, nearly 440 feet, impassable to armor, locked the south. 64 kilometers of front, 40 miles, with no open flank. For the first time, Rommel had to fight the battle offered to him, rather than the battle he chose. General Claude Auchinleck had seen it, fallen back to this line deliberately, taken direct field command on June 25th, because he wasn't sure anyone else understood what was at stake. What he had to work with was not reassuring. Understrength battalions, shattered tank regiments, officers commanding men they'd never met, 3 liters of water per man per day, just over 3 quarts, flies that nobody who served there ever forgot. He told them, this is the line. No fallback positions, no authorized withdrawal. Here, not 1 meter further east. July 1st, 0330 hours. The dust moves. The 90th Light Division hit the northern sector first. The plan, punch through, swing east, make Cairo untenable in 72 hours. It had worked at Gazala, at Tobruk, every time for 18 months. They ran into the 1st South African Division. I want you to hold this moment. These were the same men who'd been retreating for 6 weeks. Every signal, tactical, physical, psychological, said give ground one more time. Nobody would blame you. They were dug in on a ridge that looked unremarkable on a map and looked exactly like a killing ground from the sand. South African artillery opened at under 800 meters, less than 900 yards. The German after-action report called it devastatingly accurate and entirely unexpected. Unexpected. That word is carrying the entire weight of the German miscalculation. Their plan assumed psychological collapse, assumed 6 weeks of retreat had turned soldiers into men waiting for permission to surrender. The South Africans hadn't read that assessment. The 90th light stalled. Rommel shifted south, sent the panzers toward a fortified position called Deir el Shein, held by the 18th Indian Infantry Brigade. 1 brigade, no tanks. They were supposed to be overrun in under an hour. They lasted 9. The position fell at dusk. Most survivors were captured. The brigade ceased to exist as a fighting formation. But by then, the 15th Panzer had lost 18 tanks it couldn't replace. Supply convoys were 3 days delayed. The Luftwaffe had burned through its own serviceability rates. Rommel's timetable, entire Alamein line fallen by nightfall July 1st, was dead. 9 hours of holding bought Auchinleck 48 hours of breathing room. 48 hours for reserves to move, artillery to reposition, the line to solidify from desperate improvisation into something defensible. The 18th Indian Brigade didn't hold Deir el Shein because they understood the strategic importance of those 9 hours. They held because that was the position and that was the job. What followed across 3 weeks was not glorious. I want to be honest with you about that. Rommel attacked again. July 2nd, the panzers pushed toward Ruwaisat Ridge. The New Zealanders had 6 anti-tank guns left in some sectors. 6. They were facing 23 panzers. They stopped all of them. Not by destroying them, by making the cost of advancing too high for the fuel Rommel had left. A panzer that can't afford to maneuver around a minefield under artillery fire because it doesn't have the fuel isn't an offensive weapon anymore. It's a target. The Australians raided Tel El Isa at night, overran the Italian Sabratha Division's headquarters, shattered 2 divisions in a single operation. Rommel's northern flank became transparent. He attacked again. July 10th, July 14th, July 21st. Each attack weaker than the last. The line held. Not through brilliant generalship. Both sides made mistakes. It held because exhausted men on both sides hit their limits simultaneously, and the British line was 100 kilometers, 60 miles, closer to supply than Rommel's. That's the margin. Geography, logistics, and the refusal of broken units to break one more time. On July 4th, a supply convoy reached the front. Water, ammunition, rations, standard resupply, but also mail. Letters from home that had been chasing the army across 640 kilometers of retreat, nearly 400 miles, following unit designations through positions already abandoned. Some letters were addressed to men already dead. They were delivered anyway, to their units, to their mates, because that was the procedure, and the procedure didn't have a category for this situation. Those letters were read aloud in foxholes. Some burned afterward, some kept. Nobody recorded what they said. Some things don't end up in reports. Most of First Alamein didn't end up in reports either. Not the real version. The men who held Deir el Shein for 9 hours don't have a monument most people have heard of. Auchinleck doesn't have a biopic. The 18th Indian Brigade doesn't have a film. That's what this channel exists to fix. Because most of these stories were never told properly. If you want the real version, subscribe. The War Diary entry for July 5th, after the hardest 4 days of fighting, after units had been shattered and reformed and shattered again, lists morale as surprisingly steady. Surprisingly. As if there wasn't something holding those men that couldn't be measured in tank returns or ration counts. By July 27th, both armies stopped. The Afrika Corps down to 26 operational panzers. The 8th Army had lost 13,250 men in 30 days. No victory, no surrender, just stopped. But Rommel hadn't broken through, and while the front froze, the supply arithmetic shifted permanently. Sherman tanks arriving at Alexandria. Fresh divisions, ammunition stockpiles, Rommel would never match. His window, the genuine strategic window that opened after Tobruk, closed in the sand at El Alamein. It never opened again. Auchinleck was replaced in August. Montgomery got the command, the credit, the films. History gave him Second Alamein, fought in October against a German enemy that had already shot its bolt 3 months earlier. The battle that made it possible belonged to someone else, to Auchinleck, to the South Africans who held the coastal box before dawn, to the 18th Indian Brigade who held 9 hours with no tanks, to the New Zealanders who stopped 23 panzers with 6 guns, to the Australians who destroyed 2 divisions in a night raid, men who didn't know they were holding the decisive line, who just knew they were tired and someone had told them to stop. So they stopped. Rommel reported to Berlin in early July, breakthrough imminent. He sent that message the same day his advance permanently stopped. He never updated it. Somewhere in the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, that signal still exists. A commander telling his superiors he was about to win a battle already lost. He wrote one line in his diary about Alamein. The enemy resistance was unexpectedly strong. He wrote that on July 27th. His advance had stopped on July 5th. He'd spent 3 weeks writing attack orders before he wrote that line. 3 weeks to admit what the South Africans had known on the first morning. His entire strategy rested on the assumption that the Eighth Army was finished. That exhaustion would become collapse. It didn't. And the consequence wasn't just a battle lost. It was the end of any German strategic future in the Middle East. The oil routes stayed allied. The Persian Gulf stayed out of Axis reach. The scenario where Rommel's forces and Japanese forces pushing west from India could link hands and cut the Allies in two. That scenario died in the sand at El Alamein in July 1942. First, Alamein didn't win the war. It preserved the conditions in which the war could be won. If your family carried a piece of this, a grandfather in the Eighth Army, a name on a memorial at El Alamein, or Wellington, or Johannesburg, tell us in the comments. We read everyone. If this story deserves to be heard, hit like. That's how it gets out. A few months after this line held, the army that learned to say no learned something worse. 19 British anti-tank guns, 52 German panzers. One night at a place called Outpost Snipe, where an exhausted army stopped defending and started destroying. That's next. The desert kept its own record, and so do we.